My name is Kissner. First name is Georg. My real name is Georg. It's German. I was born and raised in Germany. How old? I'm 60. I live at Buonahulu. I came here in 1966, so that's 42 years. Oh, is that? Yeah, 42, yeah. Well, for one, the state's gotten a whole lot more crowded in terms of traffic and population density, and meaning buildings and expansion of suburbs. And yeah, just a lot more people. A lot different. I was born and raised in Germany, and, as I said, and I came to the United States when I was 14 years old, and it was something I'd always wanted to ever since I was a small kid. I wanted to come to the United States, and I got my wish, and I ended up in Nebraska when I first came here to this country. Went to high school in Nebraska and then spent a year and a half at college in Iowa, and then transferred to the University of Hawaii in 1967. My first car was a Chevy Nova. No, that's not right. In high school I had a Mercury. It was like a 58 Merc or something like that. 16. And yes, I had a car accident.
Ooh, how was that?
A year later. It was kind of scary. But the problem was I took my mom's car without permission. So I got in trouble and I got grounded.
That sucks. When
Oh, my dad was born in 1926. My mom was born in 1925, both born in Germany. My grandfather was born in 1896 in Germany. I think I can say we haven't really had any, thank God. Both of my parents lived in Germany, and then my mother moved to Hawaii after I graduated from high school, and my dad still lives in Germany. My favorite part about living in Germany, looking back, we lived at a lake, and I've always had, I guess because I grew up next to this big pond, that I always had this affinity for water, and it's one of my motivations for being here in the state. I just love the ocean, I love the water. So my childhood days really were all about getting on the water in the wintertime, and ice skating. And in the summertime, it was being in the water and swimming and, playing. And during the fall and when you couldn't swim or you couldn't ice skate or couldn't do anything like that, I usually spent my time on the water, playing games and making boats and floating boats and playing with sailboats. Always something to do with the water, as long as I can remember. So that probably is one of my fond memories. I have friends. As a child, probably my cousins. I have like 5 cousins, 2 of which are older than I, and I like to say they're my friends. And then I have one cousin that's younger, that's probably closer to me right now. She's a good friend. But in terms of people that I knew from my childhood days, under 14, probably not. Certainly not anyone I'm in contact with. For life, you mean?
Yeah. Well, just like overall advice.
I wouldn't know where to begin to start. There's so many things. and I'm not so sure it would do any good. I don't think that giving advice, unless the person is really listening, the person that you're giving the advice to is really listening, would do any good. I think the best thing, that people can do is be a role model and model a behavior that you want your kids to, or the younger generation to follow. I think that's the most influential thing that adults can do to influence their kids, and I think a lot of us don't realize that. So my word of advice would be choose your models carefully. Model yourself after the person that you really want to be. I went to an elementary school in Germany, in my hometown, which is just south of Frankfurt. It's mostly southern Germany. And then I went to what was then called the gymnasium, which is like beginning in fifth grade. And at that stage, you kind of had to decide that you're going to, get a higher education and all that. And we had to take Latin and English as foreign languages, starting in 5th grade. And then I transferred to an American school right about in 7th grade. So it was a big change. And one of the strangest thing, I don't know if you want to hear this, but one of the hardest things for me was to get rid of my German accent, which I think I've gotten rid of for the most part. But other kids, my peers, would make fun of my accent, of course. It was a German accent, and that's kind of funny for a lot of people. And so I try to cover that up real quick, which, I see that happening with kids when they come over now from other countries, and they come to Hawaii, and you see them struggling with the language. So I have a lot of empathy for that.
Can you speak German?
I do speak German fluently. Yeah, I think it happens all the time. I mean, it just, you associate the song with a moment in the past that I think everybody has that. Yeah. And now if you're going to ask me what song, I couldn't tell you. Probably the way I acted towards some of my friends and people that I knew at the time. I think I was, like probably many young people, I was very arrogant, cocky, if you want to call it that. And I probably said and did some things that offended some of my friends that were really trying to help me and trying to, be nice to me. And I think I was a real banana sometimes. And that's what I regret. I mean, all the stupid things I've done towards people, not things that I've done for myself. I mean, I suffer the consequences, but it's the way I treated some of the people. I don't think it was right. I would never do that. I hope I would never do that now. So that's my only regret, really. Other than that, I don't regret, doing what I've done. It's all a learning curve, and I want to believe that I'm a little bit wiser than I was 40 years ago. I actually had a job as a lifeguard for the first 3 summers when I was working in high school. And again, it was near the water. It was a city and county pool back in Bellevue, Nebraska. And hired as a lifeguard. At some point during that career, I was accused of throwing a kid over the fence by a parent, and it was actually, I was hauled into court for that. It turns out, of course, it never happened, but people, this parent was convinced that I'd taken his son and thrown him over the fence. He was very upset and went in front of the judge, and long story short, it was much ado about nothing, and but it kind of scared me. The first time I heard dating was in 7th grade, or 7th or 8th grade, I think it was, 7th grade. And I was already in American school at that point, and I'd never heard that term. I never knew what a date was. And it meant having a girlfriend or doing something with a girlfriend, like going to a 7th grade dance or something like that. So that whole thing was totally new to me, and it just felt very awkward. But That was my first date, I think, was in 7th grade to a dance. Kind of funny.
When did you first leave home, like, for a trip without anybody, like, just you?
Man, you mean totally independently?
Yeah.
I would have to be college, going off to college, and probably the first 2 or 3 places I was offered football scholarships at the time, and I went to 3 different places to visit, and that was probably my first trip that's meaningful because it meant being away from home and being on my own and being self-sufficient. So yeah, visiting those 3 different universities that I had a chance to go to. My grandfather was born in 1896. He was, well, what, 17, 18 when the war broke out? What is that? 18, I guess. 1914, the war, First World War. And he was 18 years old. He was a sergeant in the German army during the First World War. And he experienced the trench warfare that you guys may have heard about. He was part of that. And he told me about the horrors of that. And he used to tell love stories too, war stories. And it was amazing to hear him, survive that war with all the horrible things that went on. At one point, he was at Verdun in France, where he was actually shelled in, and he was buried in a basement under a house, and they didn't know if they're going to get out again. Another anecdote he talked about was Christmas, and I think that may be recorded in a movie called Joyeux Noël, I think is the name of it. It's a French movie. It talks about the French and the German and the English during trench warfare at one of the Christmases, I think it was 1914, where they actually exchanged gifts, and they had like a truce, and they all partied together, and then next few days went back to their trenches and continued killing each other. It's one of the most amazing things, and I think. But he talked about exchanging foodstuffs with the French and throwing stuff into the other trenches. Like bread and wine would go back and forth between, even though they're supposed to be enemies. Fascinating person, my grandfather. Is probably my role model. He survived the Second World War. He was, at the end, they were trying to draft him into what was called the Volkssturm. It's the last resistance that Hitler tried to offer. And he actually was hiding in the closet when the soldiers came by to get anybody that you could give a gun to and could help defend the country at the time. So he was hiding in the closet, make sure that he wasn't drafted under the Nazis. My father luckily survived the Second War. He was 18 when he was a gunner in the Second World War. He was an anti-aircraft gunner. He was a young guy. And my other grandfather, my father's side, was a doctor, physician. And he had written a note to the commanding officer of my father to have him leave Berlin because he was told that, or the note stated that the house had been bombed where they lived. And in the German army in the Second World War, there was this rule that if you have any relatives or any part of your family is killed or whatever, you have the right to leave the front line and they take you back. So it was a ruse, of course, wasn't true. And my dad left Berlin and he went to the hometown. He went home and here was a house. He really believed that the house had been bombed by the Allied bombers, and it wasn't true. So it was just a trick to get my dad out of Berlin, and shortly, within a few days later, of course, it was run over by the Russians. So it was pretty close. Yeah, exciting stuff in that time. I'm a boomer, right? A baby boomer. So the thing that hit me the most was John F. Kennedy's assassination. I was in high school, a sophomore, sitting in Latin class, of course, everybody that's been through things like that, you always remember. Like you guys remember what October 15th, exactly where you were when the earthquake 2 years ago or a year and a half ago, right? Same thing. I mean, I remember that it was just like a big earthquake when we heard over the school announcement, the PA system, President Kennedy has been shot at. It was just like a major shock. And those next 3 days were just like, they were like a nightmare. And I was young. I'd never really paid attention to, politics much. But to hear that that guy was shot and everybody really liked him, I think he was a very popular president. That was probably the most tragic thing. And then combined with that, now in retrospect, 2 years, was it 2 years or 6 years later, his brother was killed, assassinated, Robert Kennedy. So all these things are happening, that I think are real critical in terms of his history and events.